I'll turn it over to Jason.
Great. Thank you, Susan, and thanks for coming. So we're going to flow down the river here, and I'm going to eddy out a couple places and talk about some of the subjects. So talk about the research in Macon County around water. We'll get into one of the biggest pollutants of our watershed is sediments. Talk about the importance of shade and riparian buffers. Talk about the biological wonders of our watershed. Drinking water. Talk about floodplains, which has been in at least the local news quite a bit lately. And then some of the new pollutants that are on the scene. So you probably can't find another county in the east that has more water research in it. And at least I can't think of any other county that has more research around water, primarily because of the Coweta Hydrologic Lab. So it's 5,400 acres, established in 1936. In 1980, it became a long-term ecological research site funded by the National Science Foundation. So I'm going to be using a lot of their research. And my boss and the PI for the principal investigator was Rhett Jackson, so a lot of his research I'll be showing. He's a hydrologist. Be pulling some information from Mainstream Conservation Trust, and the man in front of me here, Dr. Bill McClarney, is 34 years in counting, the Index of Biotic Integrity, the Aquatic Biomonitoring Program. And then when we talk about new pollutants, I've been working with Dr. Jerry Miller at Western Carolina University. And so at the end, I'm going to share a little bit of our research, results of our microplastics research. But we also have others who are doing research in the basin, including the North Carolina Environmental Quality, Mountain True, another nonprofit in our region, who's looking at E. coli counts. And TVA, they do their own fish surveys in aquatic biomonitoring. So I'm going to start out with this. I'm going to bring this up several points in the presentation. Streams are products of the landscapes they drain. All right? I want you to think about that. Streams are products of the landscapes they drain. Streams are products of the landscapes they drain. So Middle Creek, this is where I live on Middle Creek Road. I have some neighbors here who live on Middle Creek. This was taken back in 2015. And this is a small plot of land that someone cleared, probably less than half an acre, but it was steep, and it's clay soils, and the rain came, and if you've lived here any amount of time, you know we get these intense summer thunderstorms, and this is what the creek looked like. So sedimentation is one of the biggest issues for water quality. Why is that? Well, would you want to swim in that? So it can affect the ability of fish to see food. It can clog the cobble and the interstitial spaces, so boulders and the gravel, so that insects can no longer get in there. It can clog the gills of the fish. It has just a host of problems. So a lot of us may not think of dirt as being a pollutant, but when you get levels like this, it can be pollutant, particularly chronic sedimentation. So to look at this issue, this is a study done with the Coweta LTR. We wanted to see what effect the landscape had on sedimentation. So we looked at forested watersheds, so Fall Creek at Coweta, and then Ray Branch. Those are our forested watersheds. We looked at 3 watersheds in the valleys. So the valleys are where people have traditionally lived and farmed. So we looked at the South Fork of Skinner Branch, Jones Branch, which is a trib of Cartooga Jay, and Cowee Creek. And then we looked at 3 mountain developed watersheds. So this is a relatively new phenomenon, started in the 70s when people began to move here and build on mountains and mountaintops. And so that includes Kayla Creek. I'll bring up Kayla Creek again later on. Watauga Creek, particularly the upper slopes of Watauga watershed. And Bates Branch, which had a new development in the headwaters. And then we have an urban watershed, Crawford Branch, which runs through the town of Franklin. And we also monitored 3 big river sites. So Cardigan Creek, near where the Ingalls is, which is shown here. Prentice Gauge, which would be in Otto on the Mason, Middle Tennessee. And then Needmore, which is at the far end of the watershed. So we measured sedimentation. We looked particularly during storm events. All right, so I am going to show some graphs, right? This is the science talk, but I'm going to explain what these graphs mean. So on the y-axis is total suspended solids. So what we do is we get a water sample. It could be full of sediments. We filter that sample, dry it, weigh it, and that tells us how many milligrams of sediment is in that sample of water. These are the creeks down below, and this is a log scale, all right? So this means 10 times as much sediment, another 10 times as much sediment as this. So we use a log scale because it squishes all the data together. It makes it easier to see. So what I want you to get from this, the forested watersheds by far have the lowest amount of sediments. When we get into our valley watersheds, the sediment levels go up a bit, right? This is where people traditionally live and farm. Some of this sediment is probably farming impacts, gravel roads. But the highest was in the developed watersheds on the mountain. That's because of roads, steep slopes, and just a steeper environment. These watersheds had about the same amount of sediment as in Crawford Branch, which is our urban stream, highly impacted stream. And then our rivers kind of reflected in that. The Cartuga Creek and the Middle Tennessee were kind of representative of that. But Needmore was more like a forested stream overall. You can see how the median is much lower than the main stem in Otto or Cartuga Creek. Cartuga Creek, the median is actually pretty high, right? And Cartuga is where we get our drinking water. So I'll talk about that a little bit. So this is an example of a watershed that we monitored. This is the wildflower development in Kayla Creek watershed. There's over 20 miles of roads in this one development. And that's primarily where the sediment's coming from, the roads. There's not many houses in this development yet. This is just another example of, on the y-axis is sediment yield, kilograms per hectare. And then this is percent non-forest. So this means you're 100% forest, and this means you can read that as being 70% forest. So when you take forest cover away, your sediment levels tend to go up. Right? Forests are important in holding those soils together. Sun Branch is actually in Reagan County that flows into, and it has a lot of cattle. At the time, a lot of cattle access to the stream that were contributing to the high sediment levels. The sediment's been around for a while, right? All streams, all rivers carry sediment naturally, but humans can often exacerbate those sediment rates. So this is kind of a cool picture. This was taken at Riverside Road in Otto a few years ago. This dark layer is the prehistoric sediment, so pre-1800. So, it took a lot of time for that sediment to accumulate. So they found some charcoal or something to date it, and dated it to 770 BC. Post-1800, settlement levels started to skyrocket. What was going on? Why is that? Well, European settlement came in. We started clearing the bottomlands first, and then we cleared the slopes, both for farming and from logging. And back at the turn of the century, there wasn't best management practices in place. So a lot of sediment got into our streams, and they still carry a lot of that load. All right, so some of the sediments we have are legacy sediments from this time period. So kind of a tenfold increase in sediments went from 0.5 millimeters per year to 5 millimeters per year. All right, so that's the sediment, and I'm going to stop there and ask if anyone has any questions about the sediment issue. So it's coming from human practices, the excess sediment. A lot of it's coming from roads. And it doesn't take, all it takes is a little bit of clearing and a lot of rain to look like that picture of Middle Creek that I showed. So what we found is it's not, most people are doing a pretty good job, but there's a few people or a few parcels that are contributing a greater share of sediment than others. Yeah.
We talk about roadways, gravel roads versus dirt roads versus blacktop roads. Is there any assessment there in terms of the impact?
Generally speaking, a blacktop road will give you less sediment. Yeah, I mean, it'll definitely give you less sediment. And matter of fact, there's some places on Foresters, Bob McCollum and I were involved with a study where they actually paved a portion of the road that goes to the Iron Bridge on the Chattooga River to reduce sediment. So that's a good way. If you have steep mountain roads, it's hard to maintain them, and sometimes it's best just to pave them for the long term.
So if you're paving the roads, the chemicals that are involved in paving, what's the balance?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. There are petrochemicals in that. And what we found in the study from Coweta was that you do get, those chemicals are washed, but then after that first rain, it dissipates. You don't have it. And so the other thing is that pavement is not porous, but most gravel roads at that point aren't very porous either. If they were porous, you wouldn't have any overland flow. All the rain would just soak into the ground. But once you compact those gravel roads, they're pretty much an impervious surface at that point. So if you have a really steep road, sometimes it's better to pave. And you can also put in, and I don't want to, I've got a lot more slides to go, but you can also put in dips and other, what's the word I'm looking for? Places to get the water off the road. Right, that's the important thing. You want that water to get off the road so it doesn't build all that momentum and velocity and volume that's going to push sediments and gravel out into the road or out into the stream. Yeah.
Is there a variation in soil type in the study areas?
Yes, but we didn't go that deep. Yeah. In general, because it was a landscape view, the soils were pretty similar. But at parcel level, they would have been different. But for this particular study, we're looking at landscapes, and so the soils were similar. All right, so shade, I'm going to, so riparian buffer shade is a critical part, and sometimes we don't think about that, shade being important. But what we found at Coweta is when you remove the vegetation and you have a mowed riparian area, the stream channel actually gets narrower, which doesn't make a lot of sense. You think it would get wider, but it's because those grasses have fine roots and they capture any sediment in the stream, so it actually gets narrower, and so you have less habitat for fish, salamanders, things like that. And then when you have a big storm, those shallow roots that have all that sediment get torn away, and get washed downstream. So it's kind of counterintuitive that the stream channel actually gets narrower when you have capacities instead of trees. When you have trees along, the community, the fish and insect community has evolved to feed on leaves and other detritus falling from the forest. All right? So particularly lumber insects, caddisflies, mayflies, stoneflies, they need that leaf litter. So when you remove the trees, you kind of pull the food away from that stream. You change the food chain. You also simplify the habitat when we remove trees. And the sediment tends to be finer. So fewer big rocks and cobble and more fine sand and clays. And then they also are warmer, right? So they're getting more solar radiation, so the streams are warmer. Oop, what you guys? Whoa. Don't know what I meant. All right, any questions? I don't know what to do. Let's see if we can get back to it. Here, let's do this. Some of these will go really fast. I know you saw there's 80-something slides in there really fast. Okay, so coarse wood, well, logs, getting all scientific. Logs are important. Sometimes we might see logs in the stream and think, it's messy, we need to take that out so the stream can run faster or better. But logs are important habitat, so when we take trees away from the stream, we're also taking any sticks or logs that might go in. So this is an example of, I think this is up at Crawford Branch. And humans tend to kind of, we are informed by what we see. We get a lot of pressure from like our neighbors or watching the Augusta golf tournament, right? This is the Augusta effect, where everything's very tidy, very neat, very pretty looking, but functionally, it doesn't have the same function as a stream that's fully forested. So it's going to have fewer critters in it. The water's going to be warmer. Going to probably have more chemicals, fertilizers that get in. So this is kind of an extreme example of a stream that's been modified. And our study showed that there's fewer critters in these streams as a result. Push that magic button. So Mainspring, and just full disclosure, I'm the board of Mainspring, so but they started this program, Shade Your Stream, to try to encourage people to leave trees along the bank. Trees help armor the stream bank, much like this massive beach here. So it's arming the stream bank from erosion. Shading the stream, keeping it cool. It's filtering out anything that might be upslope of it from getting in the stream. So trees play an important role. They're part of the stream. Right. Going back to shade. So we know it's getting warmer. Our data show that at Coweta that it's getting warmer in Macon County. Since about the mid-1980s. So these are forested streams. These green, so this is Ball Creek and Ray Bridge. If you see the amplitude is low, right? These are streams that don't have forest cover. So the amplitudes are very high. And the temperatures get close to, at the time, almost 30 degrees Celsius. So 20 degrees is 68 degrees Fahrenheit. 30 degrees would be closer to like 86 or something like that. Pretty warm stream for a mountain stream. And brook trout, once it gets above 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit, they really struggle. And if they're in that condition for a couple days, they'll die or try to find cold water. So that's kind of our threshold when we think of mountain streams. We want to keep it under 20. And you can see how a lot of these streams, these mountain streams, because the forest cover has been removed, now far exceed 20 degrees. This is just another example. Again, Ball Creek at Coweta versus Skinner Branch. Both about the same size stream, both about the same elevation. This one has mixed use, some farms, mixed housing, where folks have cleared vegetation, and this is fully forested. You can see the difference there. So shade is important. And that's the biggest thing as a landowner. And the easiest thing to do is just maintain trees and shrubs along the stream bank. But they also, removing shade can also impact salamanders, we learned. So this is black-bellied salamanders. A common salamander in our mountain streams is kind of the orca of the salamanders in these small headwater streams. Not as big as a hellbender, but they can get about a foot long. Some of the larger ones. So we had a student, a PhD student, back in 2010, asked the question, well, what happens if you remove the forest cover from these salamanders? And so, again, to show a graph, so this is basically the likelihood of finding a salamander in a given area in a stream. And this is forest cover. So it's pretty highly likely you're going to find a salamander in an area of a stream when you have full forest cover. But as that forest cover is removed, your likelihood of finding a salamander goes way, way down. Okay? This salamander in particular is really sensitive to the removal of canopy. So she did another, so that was one part of her study. But she also looked at, if you remove the salamander and move it 75 meters away, so roughly the length of a football field away, what's the probability of it coming back? And salamanders have a really great homing ability. They have this internal compass. And so you can move them that far away and they'll go right back to it. They have this fascinating ability to make it back. Which kind of makes sense because big storm events are probably getting flushed downstream, right? So we need to get back home after the storm subsides. So this is in a canopy gap, so no trees. And this is where it's fully forested. And this is your return probability, the probability of that salamander coming back. So when you move at short distances, they're about the same. Like, yeah, they'll get back. But once you start going out here and moving it even 30, 45 meters, the return probability is really significant. So here it's around 20%, but if we look at that same place, it's only about less than 5%. So there's something about that canopy cover or the removal of it that prevents them from going back. And so this is a typical road right-of-way. So you have a 66% reduction in probability. And then transmission right-of-ways, which are much larger, have a much greater impact, 92% reduction in the ability of that salamander to find its way back. So things we don't really think about as humans, right? Like we pass transmission lines every day, and how many of you thought, well, that's probably going to impact a salamander. That's not something that comes to my mind. So biological. We live in an amazing area, and the Little Tennessee, particularly below Franklin, downstream of Franklin, is perhaps the most biodiverse stream of its size in southern Appalachia, and absolutely in the southern Blue Ridge. We have hellbenders, the largest salamander in the world. The largest that has been found is 29 inches long. We have brook trout in the headwaters of our streams. We have Tuckasegee darter, Little Tennessee crayfish. And I'm going to ask Bill, is this a spotted bass or a smallmouth?
That's a small one. The darter's a green fin, by the way.
Greenfin darter. And smallmouth. And excellent smallmouth fisheries in the Newborn. We have spot-fin chub, which is a federally threatened fish. We also have mussels, but I'll get to that. So this graph is some of Bill's data over time. So on the x-axis is years, going back to 1995 to 2025, so 30 years worth of data. The circles are the Little Tennessee at the Georgia state line. That's one of Bill's sampling points. The diamonds are at Tessentee, so in Otto. The triangles are the 441 bypass. And then this outlier up here, way at the top, is at Needmore, the Little Tennessee Needmore. And so these are index of biological integrity scores. So fish live in the streams, right? I can go out there and take a water sample, but that's just one point in time, right? Fish have to live in this stuff 24/7, so we can learn a lot about fish by the numbers we catch, the type of fish we catch, and so these are numbers. So the Needmore consistently is in the excellent area. The good news about this, what do you notice about these trends? They're all going up from very poor in the Otto area, to fair, right? So that's a good thing. So we've seen improvements in stream water quality thanks to landowners, thanks to organizations like Mainspring, thanks to shade getting back on some of these stretches is a large part of that. So some good news. Some bad news is that we do have a federally endangered mussel, Appalachian elktoe, that's not doing great. This used to be a stronghold downstream of Franklin. And since 2004, populations have just plummeted drastically. Up to 90-95% of the population is now gone. And we're still struggling to figure out why that is. Some people think excess sedimentation, but we know sediment levels were much higher probably at the turn of the century. Could it be some chemical? Could it be a disease? We just don't know. So this is a story I want to make sure was out there, because this is a cool mussel, part of our natural heritage that we're starting to lose. So talk a little bit about floodplains. This is a topic that's come up recently. And I'm not going to go into great detail. I'm also on the committee, the Water Quality Advisory Committee that Commissioner Shields pulled together. And we haven't our committee hasn't really delved deeply into this subject yet. But floodplains are important. That's where it floods. And so floodplains allow that water during floods to continue downstream. And if you build in floodplains, this is sometimes what happens. So this is out Highway 28. Some of you may recognize this house. And it's been flooded a couple times in this building. There's some button in there. So a couple terms I want folks to understand. So the floodway is that area next to the stream that usually floods. That's going to flood, and that's where your greatest velocities are. And FEMA, so at the national level, you're not supposed to build in the floodway. That's no bueno. And at the state level, the state has to follow that. So the floodway is not an issue. So when we talk about the floodplain, we're talking about that area outside the floodway. So there is the commissioners have brought up and met, and some of them, what's come up is they want to see about what if we fill in 25% of the floodplain. At first it was, as much, there wasn't a limit, but they went back and said, well, what about 25%? So that's going to be up for discussion in January. Our committee's going to get together and pull out some data and some facts and figure out if that's a good idea or not. But in general, there's a general trend of removing things from the floodway that have been built, a national trend, because we've seen time and time again how these floods can be devastating. And right now you look at the river, it's like it's bone dry up. Yeah, I don't see the problem building in the floodplain, but it becomes a problem with floods. Kind of like your roof doesn't leak until it rains. So this is just another example. So currently, based on the state, you can encroach, so you can fill in the floodplain as long as it doesn't raise the flood elevation more than a foot. So here's where the old flood would have been, but then when you fill it in, it's going to raise it. This is called a surcharge. It's going to raise it about a foot, right? And that may have consequences for neighbors, right? So that's some of the things is you have to look at the costs and the benefits of filling in the floodplain, and so maybe the cost might be too great. I'm not going to go into great detail about floodplain other than that. Any questions other than generally it's not a great idea to build structures in it? We also know the wet years are getting wetter, the dry years are getting drier, and the storms are becoming more intense. This is data straight out of Calvita. So since 2000, we've observed the 4 wettest years on record. Right here. The 2 driest years on record. And 4 of the 10 driest growing seasons. And we're in a pretty, well, this kind of reminds me of 2016, the kind of the drought we're in right now. Hopefully we'll get some rain. All right, so we know this is not model data, this isn't prediction, this is data that we see over time that we collect. What years are getting wetter. All right, so going into drinking water. I'm going to be on this subject a little bit more. This is a subject that our committee was tasked to look at because there was another proposal to strike out RVs being allowed in drinking watersheds in waters of excellent quality waters. So again, streams are products of the landscapes they drain. So the cleanest, most consistent supplies of water come from forests. And this shows the importance of surface drinking water to the region. And if you notice, we're in this blue area. So it's very important, right? Forests play an outsized role in providing drinking water to our community. As you remove the forests, the cost of your drinking water, treating it, increases. All right, this is a little bit older data from 2004. So this gets about 80, 100% forest cover all the way down to 0. So your cost of treating water increases about 7-fold. If you removed all the forest cover, you would have an increase in cost. So that's a taxpayer burden. So there's 2 water supplies that this ordinance would affect. One is Cartouche Creek watershed, upstream of the water intake plant, which is just upstream of the industrial park, off of 64. And the ordinance would affect the light green area. The other water supply that the ordinance would impact are the light colors in this. So Big Creek is a primary drinking water supply for the town of Highlands, but there's also the Mill Creek and the headwaters of the Colasagia. The dark is just extra protection. You can't, those that have, because they're so close to the water intake, those areas have extra protection afforded them. So the other stretch of river that this ordinance would impact would be the Little Tennessee, below Lake Emery, all the way to the Swain County line. And these are the excellent quality waters. This is straight from the ordinance. It's not the entire watershed, but there is a big buffer on the main stem of the river of 1,000 feet on either side, and then 500 feet of the tribs. So there are reasons to allow RV parks, right? There is a housing crisis in Macon County. My own daughter would like to move back here, and there's no housing. Rents have gone up, and there's no way she can afford a house, being only 23. So her and her husband are kind of stuck where they are. So there is a housing issue in Macon County. We pride ourselves in Macon County being an outdoor community, and RVs are campgrounds. People like to get out and get outside, and there's this whole culture of RVing. And then there are private property rights. We want to afford people to do, if it's their property, to do what they want within reason on their property. So those are all valid reasons to allow RV parks in this watershed, in this drinking watershed. There's also some valid reasons maybe not to allow, particularly RVs in flood-prone areas. Our safety concern, because these aren't structures, there are RV parks, in the floodplain and in the floodway. Some RV parks are really high density, and we know the more permeable surface you have in the watershed, that can impact water quality, because the water can no longer infiltrate into the groundwater. And there can also be septic and disposal issues. If you're in areas that flood a lot and you have a septic system and these RV parks, it can, that could be an issue. RVs, I learned also, anybody travel in an RV? Any RVers here? Yeah, I mean, sometimes you're traveling and you might be a couple days with, human waste, and so there's chemicals that you have to put in to reduce the odor, right? Some of those chemicals can be pretty harmful, and there's at least one chemical that has formaldehyde in it. And it's banned in some states, but it's an RV. How are you going to check that? And so some of those chemicals can be pretty harmful. So it's not like a typical house. It's the waste disposal. So this is Laurel Creek Campground in Caruso in Haywood County, and this campground was destroyed from Hurricane Fred. It got 10 inches of rain in the headwaters of the East Fork of the Fish River. 4 people died from this campground. This campground had been flooded before, back in 2004, when Hurricanes Francis and Ivan. It was flooded again in 2013 in high rains. Both times, federal dollars were used to clean up and rebuild the campground. This time around, federal dollars were paid for cleanup, but not to rebuild. They learned their lesson. Debris was scattered all downstream impacting bridges, impacting power supplies, telephone poles, impacting other property. And as a result of this, Haywood County has rewritten their watershed rules. They made them more strict. Right? They didn't need another lesson like this. The other thing our committee met in RV parks, that's a big term. There's a wide array of RV parks. So this is an example of an RV park in the Highlands. It's 5 sites. That's it, behind a gate. It's Highlands. And this is hooked up to city water and sewer, so septic's not an issue. So that's one example of RV park. This is another example actually in TBJ watershed. This is the Pines RV Park in Cabins. I think there's 2 or 3 cabins, 6 primitive sites. This is kind of like what you picture, like kind of a campsite, kind of a camp-oriented RV park. Not really near any water sources, on a ridge. Probably pretty benign. This is another RV park, similar to the Pines, but look where it's located. So these RVs are actually in a floodway. And so my question is, and I'm not trying to pick, I just have questions, what, if there is a big flood, are all these ready to be removed? Where is the septic handled? So those are some of the questions. This is not a drinking water supply, but it is a Coal State River, and we want to make sure it's clean. And then finally, we have River Vista RV Park. This is 200 plus sites with 40 plus cabins, all on a few acres on land that backs up to Mud Creek. And so this is another example of RV park. So when we say should RV parks be allowed, one of the questions we ask, well, what kind? Right? Because each one of these has different impacts. This is a lot of impervious surface, a lot of waste to handle. People that live in 400 square foot houses, they go to the bathrooms just the same amount of times as someone living in a 4,000 square foot house. So you got to deal with that waste somehow. So the other thing that the ordinance, it looks at parcels, like individual parcels. It doesn't look necessarily at the whole watershed. So we know Macon County is increasing. So I'm going to show a couple slides. These are going to go pretty fast. Here's a water intake treatment plant. So this is the area where that would be impacted by the ordinance that would allow RV parks in the drinking water supply. So we had a student, Ryan Kirk, for his PhD. He digitized, going all the way back to 1907, all the houses in the Cartooga watershed. So this is the density in 1907. 1929, 1954, 1963, 1976, 1984, 1993, 1998, 2003, 2006. And that's where it stopped because he graduated. So again, they're right about 2009, sorry. So 1907, 2009. So in 100 years, that's how many houses popped up. So what are the next 100 years going to look like? And that's something that the current ordinance doesn't really address. Again, it looks at individual parcels, but not the watershed as a whole. So we can look at that again at land cover. So this goes back to 1954, looking at land cover. What I want you to pay attention to here is the yellow. Those are row crops. Right? So in 1954, Cartouche had a good bit of crops being grown. A lot of pasture land too. Very little development. That's the gray. In the development, you're going to see this turn to gray over time. It's not one giant slab of concrete, right? It just means instead of being a row crops, it's now a residential neighborhood that has some blacktop lawns, that sort of thing. 76, 84, 93, 98, 2003, 2006. Not much yellow anymore, right? So we know we're losing farmland in North Carolina at the second highest rate in the nation. And that kind of shows it right there, right? But we're still 86% forested. That's good. That puts us on that really cheap water treatment scale, right? And the forest didn't change because the headwaters are protected by the Indiana National Forest. So what changed was the ag lands. And then we were able to squeeze out a little bit, thanks to Katie Price. She squeezed it out to 2021. And some of those pastures became crops. So that's primarily H&H farms that they have corn and other crops. There's still a lot of development. So again, what are we going to look like the next 50 years, next 100 years? That's what we looked like in 1954. That's what we look like in 2021. We mentioned roads being a contributor to sediment. It's mainly private driveways that are driving that. State roads, county roads, highways, they've all been flat since the 1950s. Very little movement, but it's the driveways that are driving the movability. So this is in kilometers, so 500 miles total, that's about 300 miles. 500 kilometers, about 300 miles. And that's just an example of the road network. So the red is all the private roads and driveways that's contributing to that. And my point about this, there's not a whole lot of oversight on these roads, right? The DOT has a lot, that's why they take so long to get roads done. But there's a lot of oversight and maybe too much, in someone's saying. But in driveways, there's not a lot of someone over there looking over their shoulder. This is just another example of the growth of the county. So going back to 1907, most of the county was very rural. The national forests weren't even set up yet, so they just appeared as blank areas. National forests set up after the Weeks Act. It's still really rural. But if you look at now, what I want you to see, this gray, dark gray is suburban densities, right? There is a definition for suburban, it's a density. And Macon County is primarily suburban. We think of ourselves as rural, but I think part of that is a shifting baseline. Like what was considered rural 50 years ago, they wouldn't consider it, well, if someone could live here now having that same baseline, they would be like, what? Red lights? This is where you live in the suburbs. And that's becoming increasingly apparent at the commissioners meeting before last, when the gentleman came up there, complaining about having chickens and dogs in his yard. And there's this conflict. More and more people are moving here and thinking it's a rural area, but it's really not based on the density. So those are creating conflicts. So the state also measures the quality of our streams. In Highlands, we have 2 streams. Again, this is an urban area. Benthos just means aquatic insects. So you can look at much like using fish as indicators, you can also use insects. And so these streams are impaired based on the insect that they eat. This is the drinking water too, these 2 streams. So they're already impaired. looking at this stretch below town, look how many streams feed into the Needmore that are in Macon. So the Kamer Fork, this fish community, I was talking with Bill earlier, went from good to poor, like in 1 year. It's the sharpest drop. And it's because of that wildflower development. There's a huge sediment that after the housing crisis, the roads were no longer maintained. We had some high rain events. And so it really impacted that creek. A lot of fecal coliform. In Franklin, the fecal coliform could be from leaky sewage pipes or septic systems that are no longer functioning. Septic systems only last about 30 years. And then they start leaking, and it could be an issue if they're near water. Once you get out here, Bradley Creek, some of these others, that's probably livestock that's contributing to the fecal coliform. Right? So my point about this is that these watersheds that are drinking water supply and excellent quality waters are already somewhat stressed from other impacts. This summer, Mountain True went out and looked at E. coli levels. E. coli is associated with fecal matter. It could be from livestock, could be from humans. You get it in you, a little bit's okay, your body can take it, but when you get a lot of it, your body reacts, having diarrhea, and you get sick. So this is at the Tassie launch area, so near on the Greenway, kind of below the library, that area. None of those came back as being healthy. Sanderstown Road, Iowa Bridge, majority passed, but there was still a lot that didn't pass. And then Queen Branch Preserve, kind of at the head of the Needmore, or the Needmore game lands. Most of those passed. It was only during lower water levels that these failed. So probably okay to swim here. Taking your chances swimming here, but probably okay, and don't swim. Don't get in the water there. Right? Why is it? We usually think of streams getting dirtier as we get downstream. You move downstream, you start in the mountain, starts off real clean, and then it gets a little dirty, and the further you move down. But that's what's special about the Needmore. Actually, you have all these good quality streams going into it. Some of them are good quality. And you have a pretty good riparian buffer, and they're able to take care of that fecal matter that's contributing to the E. coli. If there's organisms in there that are able to. So if you leave the stream alone, the stream can heal itself. Is basically the point. So streams are products of the landscapes they drain, and because of that, you are what you drink. Right? Because if we're polluting our watershed that we're drinking, we're going to be drinking more water. All right. So the new pollutants, microplastics and per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. People just call it PFAS because everyone trips over the name. So we'll start with microplastics. And there's other pollutants that I don't want to get too depressed. So microplastics, so since 2022 or so, we've been looking at microplastics at the Highlands Biological Station, at the headwaters of the Colosage River. And we're measuring the atmospheric deposition of microplastics. So yes, you can tell your friends it's literally raining plastics. We're also measuring the plastics in the streams and catastrophic. So microplastics are bits of plastics that are from other plastics. Most of what we're finding are fibers, which are shed from clothes, from textiles. So what's the problem with plastics? Well, they're everywhere. They're ubiquitous. They're cheap, durable, long-lasting. So they're a great product. However, they're cheap to produce, durable, and long-lasting. So that means they're everywhere, and they stick around for a long time. And we now know that some plastics can be carcinogenic, some Plastics, depending on the additives that are added, can mimic hormones, can disrupt hormones, and some plastics can absorb other chemicals and act as vessels for other dangerous chemicals. So it's becoming a problem. There's been a lot of news lately about microplastics. And there's no way to clean them up, really. Once they get to that size, it's not a whole lot to do. So we're going to start with what we're finding from the air. So we have these, we're measuring atmospheric deposition of microplastics at Coweta, at Highlands, and Iron Duck, which is outside Waynesville. What I want you to get from this is that we're finding a lot of blue. And if you look at the literature, at the fashion literature, blue is the most popular color in fashion, in clothes and textiles and stuff. And I'm wearing a blue shirt, so I'm representing tonight. Followed by black. So they're following the same trends, and other studies around the world have seen the same trend. And most of what we're finding are fibers. Some fragments, but again, most of what we're finding is fibers, which makes sense. Fibers are light and are going to be carried up in the atmosphere. So we're finding a good bit. And our median level of microplastics at Highlands is about 125 microplastics per square meter per day falling. So every day, 125 microplastics per square meter per day. A lot of it's coming in from wet deposition, so during precipitation. But we still have it even on days like today where it did rain, it's still just falling from the sky. And Highlands has more. This is what we hypothesize, is that Highlands would have higher rates of deposition than Coweta, than Iron Duck, because we're higher elevation and we see more rainfall. So rainfall is kind of driving this. These are our streams. So what I want you to get from this is what we're finding in the streams is what's falling from the atmosphere. We're finding a lot of fibers. These are headwater streams, so mainly forested streams. There's no industry or anything around. A little bit flip. We're finding a lot of black, but also blue. And if you compare what we're finding from the atmosphere to the streams, they match up pretty well. So this is the atmosphere. This is the base flow of streams, so level like today without rain, and this is what we get in the storm. So the colors match up well. So we feel really confident that the atmosphere is what's coming. It's not coming from roads or someone throwing a bag of Pringles out the window. It's coming from the atmosphere. And this just shows the same thing. Most of them are fibers that we're finding in the streams. I'm not going to go over every, but we have a collaborator at Virginia Tech that has an instrument, a spectrometer, that's able to tell the chemical signature of each of these particles. So we take a subsample, and everything that we thought was a microplastic, except a couple unknowns, was a microplastic. So we have confidence that what we're saying is a microplastic under the microscope is actually a microplastic. So a lot of nylon here, which is this. Polyethylene, terephthalate, what's another one? Polystyrene, a lot of polystyrene out there. And there was one, let's see if I can find it. Well, we also find some tire particles. So you ever wonder where all the tread goes on your tires? It ends up sometimes in the atmosphere, sometimes in streams. And there's a lot of vehicles on the roads, there's a lot of tire particles, which look like little fibers. And we're also looking at them in caddis-wise and to see if they're in the food chain, and we found that they are in the food chain. The case is just a caddis-fly case. They build a little shelter, and we found that microplastics in it as well. So that's the new pollutant. That microplastics, this world is a global issue. It's not something that we as Macon Counties can deal with. except to be conscious consumers. Be aware of fast fashion, where last year's fashions are out of styles. We got to buy new clothes. They're cheap and poorly put together. Don't heat stuff in plastic. You just want to stay away from trying to consume plastic. But it's nearly impossible to do. So then there's PFAs. So these are the so-called forever chemicals, and EPA in 2023 started looking at kind of drinking water criteria, like what is the threshold for PFAs. So PFAs are, one of the classic things is your non-stick pan, right? So it's resistant to heat, it's resistant to water, it's hydrophobic. It's resistant to a lot of things. And so it doesn't go away. It's resistant to all those things. And it's ended up in our bodies, where our bodies can't break it down. And so there's a lot of worry about this. The reason this came up when we were reading the ordinance, the watershed protection ordinance for Macon County, currently it's allowed in our drinking watersheds to apply treated sewage sludge on fields, which is a practice that's been going on a long time because there's nutrients in there, right? But there's recent research that also shows there's a lot of microplastics in that and a lot of PFAs. There can be. So why I'm showing this is maybe we need to re-look at not just RVs in the watershed, but take a look at that ordinance as a whole and see if there's things that we need to address or just learn more about. I'm not saying that there are PFAs in our drinking water. That's not what I'm saying, but it's something that maybe we should look into. But they're expensive to measure, right? And right now they're not being measured. Another thing that's not being measured are pharmaceuticals in the water. All right, almost done. So what can you do? So there is hope, right? So this was a stream that,
So first of all, thank you so much for doing this. This is so wonderful and so comprehensive. This whole entire presentation and all the work that you and Bill do for our community, that we all get to reap the benefits of. Highlands Biological Station, Bill, the Mainspring, formerly Land Trust for Rural Tennessee. It's because of y'all that I have this beautiful river to work on. And a presentation like this, I'm getting to my question, a presentation like this really, as you can see, brings up a bajillion more questions. There's so many facets of this presentation we could really hone in on and be activists about or learn more about both. But I think the most prescient thing right now, forgive me if I'm wrong, is we have to ask you how you get to give this presentation to the people that make decisions about this place, the people that are elected to govern this place. We have to make sure you give this presentation to them somehow. How do we do that?
So that was the plan, that still is the plan come January, is to present this. They have a report that we put together, a 20-page report of just the RV issue in drinking watersheds in the section of River Below anymore. So several of us worked on that. So they are open to that, it seems. And we've been told that in January we can also include the floodplain ordinance that's in question. And the Lake Henry thing is a bigger issue.
Yes, it is.
We can talk about it a little bit if people are interested about that.
I'd like to add something to that too, which is this is a multifaceted situation. There are people doing research that maybe aren't even worrying about the problems that we experience, but they're doing research that gives us really valuable information. There's other people doing more applied research. There's people like our little committee. Jason's on the committee, I'm on the committee, Ed, who's sitting right here, is on the committee, who are trying to present recommendations and work with county government to come up with solutions. We can, that whole gamut of people can do their very best work, and it doesn't matter. And I'm not saying that we can't make a dent. We can. There are people in county government, state government, where are you that listen to arguments. There are others that don't, are incapable of or have other motives. I don't know. It doesn't work without a whole lot of public pressure. And I have propagandized some of you to come to meetings. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to quote one of our elected representatives, not a Macon County representative, but when we asked, how can we make this work? He said, fill the room, which does not mean that everybody has to get up and repeat the same thing over and over again, and 200 Jasons and Bills have to present technical findings. It just means we need a lot of bodies standing there like, looking like, damn it, we want some results. So it all goes together. Sorry, that was plenty of soapbox.
And I left a bunch of stuff out. I was getting up to 80-something slides. Absurd. Any other questions?
So the microplastics you indicated was fairly new research in our ability to count and understand where they are and kind of prolific. Is there an understanding of the impact on human health, or is that still you really don't know at this point?
Yeah, there's starting to be more research. So there was a study that folks that had clogged arteries with plaque, they removed that plaque, and as part of the process of making these people better, and they looked at microplastics inside the plaque, and there was a correlation, a positive correlation with the amount of microplastics found in that plaque. They found a lot, and negative health outcomes. So the more plaque, the worse outcome that person was, or the more microplastics in that plaque, the worse health outcome that person had. So correlation doesn't mean cause and effect. And there's so many things in our environment now that we produce. We're really great at producing things that seem great at the time, and only find out years later that it wasn't so great. So it's hard to tease those out, but that research is being done. And that's one thing with the caddis flies. We're going to do a toxicological study to see, okay, yes, they're in those caddis flies, but what does that mean? So we have Dr. Austin Gray from Virginia Tech will be interested. Because that's the next step. Right now we're just figuring out how much is coming in, and where is it, and what is it.
What we're learning.
Yeah, but yeah, it's surprising. The U.S. is lagging in this compared to Europe and Asia. There's a lot more studies out that way. I think this is only the second or third atmospheric deposition study in the U.S. And the only one in the South is still doing that. So yeah, let your congressmen and representatives know that this is kind of an important issue. Any other questions? All right, thanks so much for coming tonight, and we'll have a good time.